if you talk to people who've been successful, often where they ended up was not where they initially planned to be. And so I always encourage people when they face disappointment, yes, it's disappointing, but say to yourself, I don't know where this will lead me, but it will lead me somewhere interesting, and I'm going to get there and find out and do the best I can, because you just never know. And it's okay to feel that disappointment, but then you need to be able to shrug it off and go to plan B.
Welcome to When You Grow Up, the podcast for conversations between students with goals and the people who have already achieved them. Brought to you by Hopkins Connect at Johns Hopkins University. In this podcast, we match students for a conversation with their dream mentor. Here's our student host for today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to all my listeners on this podcast. I am Dr. Sahil Khan. I'm from India and I'm a medical doctor. I graduated from BP Koirala Institute of Health Sciences in Nepal, subsequent to which I cleared my United States medical licensing examinations. And I'm here in the US pursuing my master's for the purpose of getting into a competitive residency spot in the stream of anesthesiology and critical care. And I'm here to talk with one of the greats of this profession, Dr. Jed Wolpaw.
Hi, everyone. Sahil, thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm Jed Wolpaw. I am an associate professor of anesthesiology and critical care medicine here at Johns Hopkins. I run the anesthesiology residency training program here, and I am a clinician as well. I spend about half my time in the OR and half in the ICU when I'm not teaching and running the program. I am originally from Cleveland, Ohio. I've lived all over. I went to medical school and residency at UCSF in San Francisco, and then came here in 2014 for my ICU fellowship here at Johns Hopkins, and have been here ever since. I have three amazing daughters and a wonderful wife who's a pediatrician, and wouldn't want it any other way. You're listening to the When You Grow Up podcast.
So good morning, Dr. Jed. Thanks for allowing me to talk to you about my aspirations. It's a privilege to be talking to you, a man of your stature, and I'm really thankful to you for this opportunity. So
it's a pleasure, Sahil. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, so I'd start tell me about yourself. You had a bachelor's in history, and from there you went on to become an anesthesiologist. So how was your journey? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, I have a fairly atypical journey. You are correct. I was originally a high school history teacher. So I was one of these people who kind of liked everything. I liked every subject in high school. I went to college, not sure what I wanted to do. I liked a lot of things in college, but during my freshman year, I did some volunteer teaching in Providence. I was an undergrad at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. I did some volunteer teaching, and I really loved it. And I thought, I could see myself being a teacher. I really enjoy this. And then I thought, well, what do I want to teach if I want to teach? And I had always really loved history, partly because I think history is fascinating, but also partly because for me, when I was a student in high school, history was the class where we did a lot of the really kind of interesting thinking about what it meant to be a citizen of society and what the direction we wanted things to go and how we might influence that. We did mock trials and debates and things like that. And I just loved that. And so I decided to study history with the goal of being a history teacher. And then I went straight from college to do a master's degree in education and get my teaching license. And I taught for a couple of years, teaching ninth grade world history, and I really enjoyed it. But I also found that it was changing quite a lot. This was right at the time when No Child Left Behind had passed, and a lot of states were producing graduation tests that really were dictating curricula. And I found that I was being told I couldn't do these things, these mock trials and debates and really deep thinking about news and teaching my kids to read the newspaper and all this stuff that I thought was so important to be effective citizens. We couldn't do because it wasn't on the test, and the pressure was overwhelmingly to teach to the test. And I just didn't love that. I loved teaching. I certainly loved my kids, but I didn't love that. And it didn't feel like something I could do as a career. And so it was a very difficult choice, but I decided to leave K through 12 education. I knew through my parents, who had gotten very involved in medical education, they're both physicians, that there was a lot of interesting teaching and a focus on quality teaching was really coming into play in medicine. And so I decided to finish up some pre-med stuff and then go to medical school. And so I went out to UCSF in San Francisco, did medical school there, had the same issue of kind of liking everything in medical school, and actually initially matched into emergency medicine, which is what I thought I was going to do. And then really fell in love with critical care when I was an intern rotating in the ICU. Back then, you couldn't do critical care through emergency medicine. And so if I wanted to be an intensivist, I knew I had to switch. And so after a lot of difficult thinking and talking with folks, I decided to make that switched into anesthesiology. And then that's where I've been ever since. It turned out to be a great choice for me.
Yeah, that's great. That indeed is an atypical path from like being a student of the arts to like totally switching into medicine. Like that must be like tough for you at the same time, though exciting, I must say. So, how does that impact you as a professional now? Like your previous background in history, like what impact does it have? Like, do you still like hold history close to your heart, like while you're teaching like anesthesiology and critical care? So, like, how is it like impacting you as a professional? Does it like help you in shaping up what you are, like the perspectives of history? Because medicine indeed has a very like deep history itself, and like it has evolved, and like we are at the pinnacle of it, and we are like taking it to new heights. So
Yeah, it's a good question. There's no doubt that history is important no matter what field we're in. And I certainly enjoy learning about the history of anesthesiology and the history of medicine. And being here at Johns Hopkins is really being at the heart of the history of medicine in our country. There's so much of the original development of medicine happened here. So it's really fascinating. And we have taken our residents before COVID, we would take them every year to Boston to do a history of anesthesia tour, where we would learn about the history of anesthesiology, which in many ways was centered there in Boston. So it was really fascinating and a great opportunity. And I do enjoy that. I'll tell you the thing that probably influences my career more than my prior experience with history is my experience with formal education training, because that is something that physicians don't typically get. If you haven't gone and sought it out yourself, if you haven't received it somehow, there's very little training in how to teach that physicians get. And yet, if you stay in academics, you are, of course, expected to teach. And so there's a lot of people teaching who don't really know anything about best practices of how to do that. And so really bringing my formal training and my prior experience in teaching to the job that I do now and helping our residents and our faculty be the best teachers they can be, that has had a big influence and really positively influenced my career.
Then that's great. So like you are like focused about like despite being an intensivist, your focus still remains on like teaching as well. And like I totally agree with you. Like the teaching aspect, especially in medical science, is of paramount importance. Like that's how you groom like a doctor to apply the sciences that he or she has acquired in the like learning curriculum to apply it to like human body. Because like when you're dealing with humans like as patients, it's a sacrosanct job, and like so teaching is of paramount importance. That's great. So like going to the next question, like tell me like since you were like since you're an intensivist, and like when the pandemic hit, like how did it affect you? Like you were at Hopkins, like you were doing the whole intensive care thing, and COVID was an unexpected thing. Like it changed everyone's life. It was like no less than a black swan event, if we call it, in like on a global sphere. So how did that like how has that changed you, and like how did you like navigate through it? Like how what was your experience?
Yeah, COVID, of course, and I think this is true for any physician across the country, was an incredible sea change in a very acute, unexpected way. And I think you're right, very acutely for intensivists and anesthesiologists, and for many others as well. But for us, there were two things, two major. There were many, many ways in which COVID, of course, impacted us. But I'd say two major things. One was that our ORs, our elective cases in the operating rooms, shut down almost completely. And so our residents, we had to redeploy. So as the program director, I had to take my residents out of the operating rooms and put them into many, many new COVID ICUs that were popping up, and they helped out some other ways too. And it was a huge change. It was a change in their expected path of education. It was a change in the way we structure our teaching. We had to think about how to do that in a way that also would keep them safe and maintain their wellness. So we restructured the way we staff the ICUs. We thought we did a cohorting strategy in case, because of course, at the beginning of this, we didn't know whether everyone was going to come down with it or how, what would happen. And so we kept kind of half people at home and half working so we could switch and pull from them if people got infected. We really focused on good communication and transparency and support for our trainees. But but it required a complete rethinking of the way that we do training for that period of time. And so that was one major change. And then the other was just obviously on a more kind of individual level for all of us, and including me, we had to both work more because there was more demand. So I did more ICU work than usual. And of course, the work itself was much more challenging in a lot of ways. It was not that the people with COVID were sicker, because of course we're used to taking care of critically ill patients, regardless of what their disease is. But the hard part was more on the emotional side of taking care of dying patients who couldn't have any family there with them. And that watching people have to die alone was, I think, one of the most challenging things for me and for many of my colleagues and our residents, that we had never really experienced to any extent like that before. So there were a lot of challenges that came at the beginning. I think we learned a lot from them. We were lucky here in Baltimore that we didn't have a similar size and intensity of surge after that initial spring of 2020. So we didn't have to, again, take everybody out of the operating room. And although we did go back and forth with restrictions on patients and families, we never went back to the complete isolation that we had at the beginning. So it got better over time, but it was a tough time for a lot of people.
Yeah, so on a personal level, how did you fight that tough time, and how did you emerge stronger from that experience? Because apart from professional strain that did I also was I was an intensivist, I worked in the intensive care unit. So on a personal level, as you said, it was pretty tough, seeing people die alone and no accountability, and especially in our case, because I was in India. So how did you get out of that? As a how did you balance your personal life thereafter? Before the event, it was good and all, and you had kids, so you must not be interacting with your kids with that frequency during that tough period. So how did that pan out for you, and how did you come out of it stronger and more resilient as of now?
Yeah. So, I think you're right. At the beginning, it was scary. And I remember my wife is a physician too. And I remember both of us, especially for me, because I was working in the ICU with COVID positive patients, we thought, should I move out? Should I move into a hotel? I mean, we talked about those things, and ultimately we decided not to do that. But we did have a procedure where I would come home, I would, strip off my clothes before I, made it past the doorway, and I would not touch anybody and go straight to the shower, and the clothes would go straight into the wash. And, I remember at the time we had a 2-year-old, and, she learned. It was kind of both a little bit funny, but also sad that she kind of knew she couldn't touch daddy when he first came home. And so, and that in her head, it was oh, when daddy's in scrubs, I can't touch him. And so if I had scrubs on it, because I was going to work, she would still be can I touch you? She wasn't sure because she was used to that. And, I can't touch daddy in scrubs. And we realized, of course, that wasn't, over time, we all realized that wasn't really how COVID was being transmitted. So we eased up on that. But that was definitely tough at the beginning. But, Sahil, my approach in life really is that if I can't change something, then I don't spend a lot of time regretting it or complaining about it or, lamenting it. I think to myself, I can't change this, so I have to make the best of it. And that can be true of anything. If I find out that I'm not going to, get some thing that I was going after, then rather than sit around and be sad about not getting it, I say, okay, I can't change that. So time to move on. And with this, it was the same thing. I couldn't make COVID go away. I couldn't go back in time and stop it from happening. It was there, and we were going to be dealing with it, and we had to just roll with it. And I feel very lucky that I'm able to kind of have that mindset of saying, okay, this is something I can't change, so I'm going to make the best of it. I also think that while I would absolutely never have wished COVID on us as a race, as a human race, if I could go back and choose, I would have COVID not happen. But given that it did happen, I think there were some good things that came of it. I mean, we really came together. I will never forget how that group of residents in the spring of 2020, and of course beyond, the residents who were there throughout the entire pandemic and still, but especially that group in the spring of 2020 who were completely taken by surprise, didn't know what was going on, how incredibly hard they worked, how they came together, how so many of them kind of stood up and said, put me in, coach, I'm here, I'm ready. I will do what is needed. I want to help. I want to volunteer. I want to help make a difference. And it was so inspirational. I'll never forget that. And so some of the courage that I drew during that tough time was from, as it often is, from my residents, my trainees, who were so brave, so strong, and who really came together in an incredibly inspirational way.
That's great. That's great to hear. And so, what message do you have? Let's say, you were a doctor at Hopkins, so Hopkins was pretty well equipped and it did pretty well, handling the pandemic. But overall, when we see the whole response as the U.S. healthcare system response, I think that was not up to the standards that was expected out of the U.S. There were a lot of fatalities and casualties that could have been avoided. So, going ahead, would you recommend any changes for the holistic refurbishment of the healthcare system so that when a next pandemic hits, or how to prevent a next pandemic from coming? Do you have any feedback or suggestions that you'd like to convey to the other healthcare systems that operate within the United States and around the world? How do we get better response? Most of the countries, despite almost all countries except for I think Australia and New Zealand, they had immense fatalities that was not expected, and everything was in shambles, be it Europe, be it America, be it Southeast Asia, Central Asia. It was blown to hell, I'd rather say, especially in our part of the world. But even the US, what people expect out of the US healthcare system, it was not living up to the mark. So how would that change, and what recommendations you as a person you would like to convey?
Yeah, you're right that it would be great if we were better prepared next time around. I think the most important thing is preparation. The problem there, Sahil, is that not that we don't know how to prepare, but that as a country, and I won't speak for other countries because I don't know them as well, but I would imagine it's true elsewhere too. It's really, people are happy to spend money on a crisis that is happening right now, but they are not very inclined to spend money on something that might happen down the road, even though that is probably money well spent. So if I were in charge of the government, I would put a lot of money towards funding research into vaccines for other potential viruses that may come, to universal coronavirus vaccines, to preparation and stockpiling of the current vaccines and others that might work, to further development into RNA technology and other technology that can be easily developed. I mean, one of the reasons that, in fact, the major reason that these vaccines against COVID were able to be developed so quickly was because of years and years and decades of work into this technology that people had put in, not knowing it was going to apply to a coronavirus pandemic. But it just happened that research had been done. And so we have to fund that kind of research. The problem is that the people who control those purse strings are a lot less likely to do it when there isn't a crisis. So I think that's what I would change. How to make that change, or how to make that happen, I don't know. And I have to say, I'm not too optimistic that it will happen. In fact, from what I hear and I read, I think there's not a lot of preparatory work being done, even as we hopefully get out of this current pandemic, or at least into a phase of it that is much less severe. And it's easy to remember how bad it was because it just happened. There isn't a lot of impetus to say, we can't go through that again. Let's invest in making sure we're ready the next time. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening.
Yeah, that was great insight. Basically the whole technology of RNA vaccine saved us, and that very technology is taking us to new heights, if I may say, because if you know the genetics more properly, if you apply it to on a personalized level, so even your podcast, you were discussing with Dr. Mayo from Denmark, the differential effects of hyperoxia. So with a more detailed genetic analysis and a more robust way of hemodynamic monitoring, we could get there. And we have nanosensors. That's one of the areas where I want to work, is implementing the nanosensors in critical care settings, so that we may get a more robust data because let's say like with all, like we have everything, but the research that we conduct is like it's an in vitro approach. So like we do it in vitro and then we apply it in vivo, and it's a gradual step. And like with the advent of nanosensors that are non-toxic and they're compatible, biocompatible nanosensors, we can just use them to measure the metabolites and the other like physiological parameters in a much more assiduous way. And like we can get a more comprehensive biochemical understanding and dynamic understanding of each and every like human body, because every human individual is different in some way or the other, like as you discussed over there. And so like if we implement this, and as you said, like the funding is sparse, but like that's what I think, like nanotechnology has a potential to like create and like basically like change the healthcare dynamics that we operate in. So yeah, like I'm like still hopeful, like if I get into a good residency, I'll definitely like pitch up this thing. So like hemodynamic monitoring using nanosensors, and the data it will generate and the understanding of like the human body will be like taken to a new height. That's what I believe. And like I've been working on my proposals, and let's see like how that pans out. Like so, like coming to the next thing, like tell us about your podcast. And like you do like your podcast. Like I have been listening to it. I've listened to a couple of episodes, like the hyperoxia one, and then the neonatal emergencies, and then you also talk about like other issues that plague healthcare, like racism or the like scope of technologies, and like how technology can revolutionize, especially is like tailored to the like anesthesiology and critical care. So tell us, how did you like get there? Like what made you start that podcast, and what like drives you in
Yeah,
doing that?
I'm someone with no technological savvy whatsoever. But the story is that when I was an intern in emergency medicine, there was a podcast called, it's still out there. It's called MRAP, and it is kind of a comprehensive podcast about the latest goings on in emergency medicine. And they talk about articles, they talk about learning points, and it's released once a month, I think, or at least it used to be. And as far as I knew, when I was an intern, every trainee in emergency medicine and many attendings listened to it, and it was just so helpful. You could listen to it while you were driving to work or on the bike or out for a run, and then you had all this interesting information you were learning, and you could talk about with colleagues and further your discussion. And then I switched into anesthesiology, and I thought to myself, okay, I got to find the MRAP version that is for anesthesiology, and it just wasn't there. It didn't exist. There was really nothing that was like that in terms of a podcast in anesthesiology. And so I thought to myself at the time, wow, this is really a hole. We have this need for something like this. It was so useful to me, but just doesn't exist. And I thought, oh, maybe someday I'll try to do it, but I didn't know what I was doing, and as a resident, I didn't have time. And so it was kind of in the back of my mind, but I never did anything about it. And then when I finished my fellowship and I became an attending, and I started getting involved with helping to teach our residents, a lot of them were asking for the same thing. They were saying, hey, do you know about any audio resources? We'd really love some audio resources. And I thought to myself, I should really try to do this. And as I said, I had no idea what I was doing, but the way I started it is I had a lecture that I was giving, anyway, in person to the residents, and I just recorded it. I looked up on YouTube how to use GarageBand, and I just hit record on GarageBand on my computer, and I just gave my talk into my computer. The audio sounded terrible. I didn't have a microphone. I was just talking into the laptop. And then I emailed it out to my residents, and I said, here you go. Here's an audio lecture if you want it. And they said they loved it and they wanted more. And then they said, you should put this online, instead of just emailing it to us, you should put it on iTunes. And I said, okay, great. I don't know how to do that, but if anybody can help me, I'm happy to try. And so some of the residents helped me figure out how to start a website and put these recordings up on iTunes. And it just went from there. That was 6 years ago. And now we've got 220 some episodes, and, it's been 6 years. It's been an incredible journey. I'm excited to continue it. I learn a ton from interviewing these amazing guests who have done incredible things, and I get incredible feedback. We've now got more than 50,000 listeners in more than 100 countries around the world, which is just hard to believe, but it is true. And it's so rewarding. I get emails from all over the world. I get emails on any given day from Pakistan or New Zealand or Turkey or wherever, and it's somebody saying, hey, thank you so much, I love the podcast, I listened to it, or they have a question. And it's really, really rewarding. So it's been an incredible journey. I'm so glad that I did it. I'm grateful to the residents who helped me figure out how to do it. And I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah, that's great. And like, if you want, I can like talk to like some tech guys, like tech savvy guys, like I'm friends with in my apartment, and like they could like they are doing like plenty of good things. And like I sent you one of the links as well for the conferences. So if you want, like I can just like show your podcast and like get a feedback and like send it back to you for like finessing it further for its broader outreach like globally. If you want, like I can do that. Let's see, like, yeah, definitely it's a great podcast. It helps the residents. It like gives a holistic approach. So I'll just talk to them and see like what can like if it can be made any better and like on a like better platform, and so with a broader outreach. Why not?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, definitely. I'll keep you posted regarding that. Coming to like the other question. So like as I said, like I'm an international medical graduate, and like so I did my USMLE exams and all, like cleared it. And so like and for subsequent to that, I did my research training from Harvard, and I was lucky enough to like be like talking to Dr. Kenneth Christopher, who guided me in the right path to like do a master's and then a research fellowship and acquire like clinical experiences while doing all these things to get into a competitive residency match. So, what would you suggest me as an IMG? Like, how do I like work ahead? Like, what would be your suggestion to like match into a competitive residency program such as yours? Because like if I do a good residency, then definitely like I like learn better things, and I can just go back and like do things in India like that is lacking over there.
Yeah, Sahil, I think you're doing a lot more than many people do, and things that will really help you along that way. Unfortunately, as you've identified, it is an uphill battle. And I think part of that is because programs don't know your medical school, or many, medical schools that aren't in the United States. So it's hard to know what to make of training at those schools, or even with, for example, a class rank, how to know how that influences anything, or what a grade in a given medical school means. And so it's just a little bit, it's a little bit challenging. I think that said, the way to distinguish yourself, which you are doing, is to do some things that make you stand out. So you're doing a master's degree at obviously a very nice and prestigious place. You have done other work. You're doing research and have done research. Any clinical experiences you can get, and that can be a big challenge, but if you can get them, I think are really key. And staying in touch with people back at your home institution, because you're going to need letters from them. And then, you kind of, and with you, you've already done this, but for other folks out there, you need to spend a lot of time studying for your USMLE exams, because that's going to be a huge barrier. It shouldn't be. We do know that standardized test scores really only tell us how good someone is at standardized testing. It really doesn't correlate with how good of a physician someone is going to be. That said, in a lot of specialties, including anesthesiology, you have to be able to pass standardized tests. Now, that hopefully will change at some point, that we put so much high stakes emphasis on these standardized tests, but it is what it is. And right now, programs need to know that you can take these tests and do well. So that's huge, and people need to spend time studying for these exams. So those are the things that I would try to do. And then you take your best shot. And you also need to have backup plans, because on any given year, this past year, anesthesiology, there were a huge number of people, even American medical grads, who went unmatched. And so, I think, again, it's one of those things that you have to have in your head. I'm going to do the best I can. It's possible I won't match. And if I don't match, here's my plan. And then if that happens, you say to yourself, okay, I can't change it, right? This is kind of what we talked about before. You say, this is disappointing, but I can't go back and undo it. I can't force, I can't go back and force a program to match me. If I don't match, I need to have another plan, and I need to pursue that plan. Because the thing you find is that you never know. And even though we all hatch these plans and we have in our head, I have to do this. I have to go to this program and this school and study this thing and be this kind of doctor. If you talk to people who've been successful, often where they ended up was not where they initially planned to be. And so I always encourage people, when they face disappointment, yes, it's disappointing, but say to yourself, I don't know where this will lead me, but it will lead me somewhere interesting, and I'm going to get there and find out and do the best I can, because you just never know. And it's okay to feel that disappointment, but then you need to be able to shrug it off and go to plan B.
And so, like, Dr. Jed, so coming to like, what do you think? Like, so like, my plan is to like train here, and then like what I learn here, like institute those practices back in my place. So, and for that, like, there will be some structural barriers, there will be socio-cultural barriers. So, how do you think should I go on about this? Like, what impediments will I face, like, as I walk ahead the like path that I've chosen to, and like, how do I optimize it, and how do I like just get the best out of it? Like,
yeah, so I'll tell you, I can't give you good advice on how to implement change in another country. That's something I haven't done, though there are many people who certainly can give you good advice on that. But in terms of making change in a big system, that is something I have some experience with. And I can tell you that any time you try to make change in a big system, you're going to face significant barriers. It's going to be challenging. So first thing, you have to go in knowing it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fast. And that's okay. You got to stick with it. So that's number one. Number two is and there are, by the way, there are great books and things you can read to kind of really think about making change in an effective way. But I'll say some of the key principles are the following. One, make sure that you involve every stakeholder. The big mistake people make sometimes is they come in with a great idea and they, go to the CEO or, the department chair, whoever it is, and they say, let's do this. And it's inevitably going to fail if you haven't brought in everybody who's involved, right? You got to talk to all the departments who are going to be affected. You've got to get to the folks on the ground. That's really key. The nurses, the trainees, the techs, whatever it is that you are, and talk to everybody and get everyone's input and make sure you get buy-in from all the stakeholders. So that's really key. And then, make sure you do get buy-in from the people with the power and the purse strings. So you also don't want to just get together with a bunch of, on the ground providers, come up with a great idea and then go, present it as a complete done idea to the person in charge. You need executive partnership so that they know they're a part of this process. They know what's going on. They can give input along the way. They can tell you what is and isn't possible in terms of what can be, afforded and funded. And then to the extent you can, make a case, show how this will benefit. Why should the executive spend money on this new idea? How will it benefit the health system? How will it benefit patients? How will it maybe save money down the road? So you have to make all these cases, but you need everybody involved. You need buy-in from everyone. And that takes some time to lay that groundwork. So don't rush in with a great idea to try to implement it. Go in, find out who's involved, find out who the stakeholders are, get them all together. That slows the process down, but it's your best chance at success. And then just know it's going to be slow. When you have a big organization with a ton of inertia, it is not going to change fast. So don't be disappointed when it's a slow process, but you can do it. You just have to get that buy-in and then slowly push for change. Be flexible. If your first idea doesn't fly or you have to modify it or, something you were hoping to do isn't going to happen, just like we talked about before, have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D and be ready to go. And then the last thing I'll say is know that when you're planning something, you're never going to be 100% sure that it's going to work. And you're never going to be 100% prepared. You have to be ready to put it into place when you're about 75 to 80% ready, knowing that it might not work or you might discover some stuff along the way that you need to change, but that's okay. Because if you wait till you're 100% perfectly prepared and 100% sure it's going to work, you're never going to get there. So you're never going to start the process. Good luck. I know you're going to do great things, and I'm excited to see what you come up with.
Oh, thanks a lot, Dr. Jed. And once again, I'd like to sincerely thank you just for sparing your time and sharing your valuable insights. And I look forward to listening to your further podcast as well to gain a further insight into the workings of anesthesiology out here and the contemporary issues that relate with it.
It's been a pleasure, Sahil. Thank you for having me on the podcast, and good luck to you.
You have been listening to When You Grow Up, the podcast for conversations between students with goals and the people who have already achieved them. Thank you to our When You Grow Up podcast student team and all the people who make this podcast possible, including our editors, Thomas Nishimoto and Josh Felton, our relationship associates, Camille Blake and Laura Flynn, our marketing coordinator, Himanshi Sharma, our project manager, Ben Stevens, our host students, and all of our guests.